In Project 2, we're going to take a look at the Goal Seek feature, and you'll notice at the bottom of page 155 they're going to show us that the Goal Seek feature allows us to calculate a value using a target that you want to achieve in another cell that is dependent on the cell you want Goal Seek to populate. For example, they give you a grade scenario here, but you could determine based on an average of scores what a student has to get on their final exam in order to earn an A or in order to earn a B. And so we're going to take a look at that in Project 2. What happens is really that Goal Seek causes Excel to calculate in reverse somewhat based on an ending value that you give, such as a grade. If you wanted to get a 90%, we know that ending value. Excel tries to figure out what the input value, such as that final exam grade, what that needs to be in order to achieve the results that you want as your final grade. Now keep in mind too that Excel, in order for Excel to calculate the target value, it must be referenced by a formula in what they call the set cell, and the set cell obviously would be your final exam grade. So it's definitely useful for any situation where you know the result you want to achieve, but you're not just sure how that value, how you'll get it, and what value will actually be needed to achieve that purpose. There's only one variable that's involved in this Goal Seek feature. In Project 3, we're going to take a look at Scenario Manager feature. That's another what-if analysis tool that Excel has, and with a Scenario Manager you can have multiple variables to reach your end result, whereas the Goal Seek feature, there's only one variable that you can use to receive the end result that you're looking for. If you look at the top of page 156, they give you the worksheet, and actually I have it on your screen before you. These are the test scores that this student has already earned. You can see the objective test. These are all, I'm going to say so-called percentages, but just because they're based on 100 points. But you'll notice the average grade, there is an average function that includes all these values, including the final test, even though there's a 0 in it. But that has to be referenced, as I mentioned before, within a function or a formula in order for this to work. So what you want to do is you want to make the cell that has your end result active, and I'll show you why in just a minute. If you'll go into the Data tab in the Data Tools group, you'll see the What If Analysis button, and we've looked at this before with the data table, but we'll go into the Goal Seek feature. Now the set cell, we actually want the set cell. Now this is where we've got to determine whether or not we want an A, B, or C, and the first time through they want us to achieve a 76, which must be a C or passing. So this cell, B11, must be 76 by changing this value. So the computer has to calculate whatever value is necessary to earn a 76 for the final grade, or for the final, the average grade. So I'll click OK out of that. You'll notice it placed the average grade. You had to get a 76%. That's what we stated in the Goal Seek dialog box. This student has to get 81.5% on their final test in order to achieve a 76%. Okay, now that's kind of shooting average there, but let's say we want to get a B. Okay, let's say 85% is a B. So let's cancel out of that. Go back into our What If Analysis button, choose Goal Seek. This time we want that cell to be set at 85% by changing this value. Ooh. On that one they have to get 126 on the final test, which is probably not likely since there's only 100 points. So let's try it again. Let's try it 80% and see what happens. So this cell is going to be set at 80. We want it to come up with 80. We need to know what we get on the final test. Okay, they need 101. So not real sure that they're even going to be able to get a B on the final test, or as their final grade. Depending on if they have extra credit or bonus there, I guess, is whether or not they'd be able to do it. So, all right, we get the idea of what the Goal Seek feature with an end result in mind, you can have the computer calculate what value or what input is necessary to come up with that end result. Okay, I'm going to cancel out of that, and we're going to look at another what-if analysis tool. It's very similar to GoalSeek, where we just had one variable, but the Scenario Manager allows you to store multiple sets of assumptions or variables about the data and then view the impact of those assumptions on your worksheet. And we have another workbook that we can go to that I've already opened, the National CSD Department Budget, and I've already renamed it. But you can see here, this is the Computing Services Department. Their current budget, you can see each one of these are just raw numbers. Okay, their projected increase, okay, you can see there of each one of those, again, raw numbers. So their new budget, they're taking those, adding those together. Okay, and then there's the sum. Okay, now what we're going to do with the Scenario Manager is we want to play a little bit where we've got high inflation, maybe the increase is several thousand more than what's being projected here, and then we also want a low inflation rate where maybe next year they may have even a decrease. Well, it's going to be an increase, but maybe not as much. But these are the baseline numbers that we'll be using. We're going to just assume that that's kind of an average rate, but it could be high and it could be low, and we want to know how that will overall affect the new budget amount, which would be found in D8. So to do that, again, using the Scenario Manager, I'm going to go back to the Data tab, What If Analysis button, and choose Scenario Manager. And then we're going to set up different scenarios, a low inflation, a high inflation, and then we'll already have this original set of numbers. So I'm going to click on Add to add a new scenario. We're going to call the new scenario Low Inflation. And by the way, let me cancel out it just a second. I want you to see something here. Notice there have been named cells already taken place. Each one of these have been named. That will help us out tremendously when we create a summary report. Otherwise, if you don't have these named in the summary report, it'll give you a number that's described by C4, C5, C6, and we don't know what those are going to represent. I'll try to come back and remind you of what's been going on here. But notice here, total new cost. The D8 has been named, which will be helpful in our summary report, but the remaining cells, when I click on those, notice all of them have been named. You can see that because they're going to the various cells. Okay? Alright, let's go back into the Scenario Manager, adding a new scenario called Low Inflation. Okay, and then the changing cells, these are the ones that are going to change. There's going to either be low, like maybe 10,000, 1,000, 4,000, 1,000. We just need to come up with a certain, and I'm sure they've applied a certain rate to these to get up with these numbers. But anyway, these are the ones that are going to change, either low or high, and that'll affect then what the new budget is. So those are changing cells. Click OK. Now you can see in our dialog box, instead of it saying C4, it's going to say wage increment, supplies increment. I don't know if that's very helpful, but anyway, they've named each one of those cells instead of it saying C4, C5, C6, and C7. Okay. Now the values, again, this is somebody's made this up. Maybe they've said it's a 1% increase, 3% increase. I don't know what, but these numbers have been calculated somehow, and I'm getting those numbers from our text that's on the top of page 159. So for the first one, it'll be 12,010. And then 2150. You can see all these numbers are just a little bit lower than what the originals are. Alright, and I'll click OK out of that. Notice the scenario Low Inflation has been added to our list. We're going to add another one called High Inflation. And again, our changing cells are C4 through C7, so we don't need to do anything there. Click OK. This time the numbers are going to be higher than our originals, the first one there. And again, I'm getting these numbers from page 159. Okay. And again, all those numbers were a little bit higher than what the originals are. Okay. So then, and we're going to add one more called the original. So we have the original forecast in there as well. So we can go back to that pretty quickly. and the original numbers will automatically pop up. So we'll leave those. We don't have to make any changes to those. We're just naming these values. And then I'll click OK. So now we have all three scenarios in there. So if I go back to low inflation, I could go in and edit, make changes to the numbers if I needed to, which I probably do. I didn't even really review those numbers. Hopefully they're correct. I could go to high inflation, edit those. And again, I can see those numbers that I keyed in. I could go in and make changes, edit those however I wanted. So those are stored in there. Now, what you can do is you can actually look to see that if I put those numbers in, the low inflation, notice at the bottom of the dialog box, if I click on Show, watch these change. Those numbers will be put in those cells, and you can immediately see what the new budget amount is if it's low inflation. If it's high inflation, watch again these numbers. Those are the numbers we put in our scenario, and so there we can see what the difference is if we have high inflation. And again, original forecast, if I want to go back to the original numbers, that'll show as well. Okay, and so again, each one of those scenarios could be edited. You can delete those, as you've seen before there. They talk about both of those at the bottom of page 159. Top of page 160 talks about deleting a scenario. And they talk about showing the various scenarios, and we've done that in Project 3B. Now, a cool thing is you could generate a report from this. When I show each one of these, that's fine, but it's just for that particular scenario that will appear. If we want to see all three of those scenarios side by side, we could generate a summary report that allows us to do that. So in Project 3C, we're going to create one of those summary reports. And essentially all you have to do is click on the summary button in your Scenario Manager dialog box. And we want it to be scenario summary. The result cells are based on what our total costs are. And we were already in that particular cell before we came in, so it's going to keep that at D8, which is what we want. And then go ahead and click OK. And notice it generated a new worksheet. It's before our sheet that had the information in it, but it's called Scenario Summary. Notice now the low inflation, high inflation, original forecast, all those numbers are set in there just like we had when we entered in the dialog box. And it also shows what the total costs are. So we don't have to go through and click on Show each time to know what the total new cost or the new budget would be. And keep in mind too, if those cells had not been named, it would come up with C4, C4, C5, C6, and C7. That would say D8, which is not real helpful. You'd have to go back to sheet 1 to find out what those cells are referencing to, and so it's nice to have those cells already named so that in your summary report you can see what they're referring to. So it makes it very nice. So again, this is another what-if analysis tool or a data analysis tool that takes into consideration varying cells. Okay, we had what, 4 different cells here, and actually 12 because we were able to put in different scenarios that had a variety of cells in there to see how that affected the new budget. So this has a variety or more than one variable to determine what your input result is going to be, whereas the goal seek, you only have one input value that you can allow the computer to change.